My daughter's DNA matched with my billionaire CEO ex-husband's family by accident, and he denied her to save his empire. The conference room felt like it was closing in. Elise sat across from the man whose eyes she'd inherited, watching him study the DNA report with the same calculated precision he probably used to dissect merger agreements. His jaw tightened. His fingers went white against the paper's edge. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Science doesn't lie. I'm your daughter." Grant Whitmore, billionaire CEO of Whitmore Systems, looked up from the document that confirmed what his mirror had already told him. This girl, this stranger sitting in his office with his mother's cheekbones and his own unsettling green eyes, was telling the truth. He could see it. He knew it. And yet, "Miss Cole." His voice carried the kind of cold authority that had made senators nervous and competitors fold. "I've built my career on facts, on data that can be verified and tested. What you're presenting is compelling, I'll grant you that. But timing is everything in business, and right now, the timing of this claim is extraordinarily convenient." "Convenient?" Elisa's composure cracked just slightly. "I didn't ask to discover that my entire life was built on a lie. I didn't ask for a father who looks at DNA evidence and calls it convenient. I'm saying I need more than a percentage on a screen before I upend everything I've built." "You mean before you risk your precious empire?" She leaned forward, and in that moment, Grant saw not just his features reflected back at him, but his own ruthlessness, his own refusal to back down. "I came here for answers, not money. But I can see now that you're too afraid of the truth to give me either." He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He wanted to tell her that fear had nothing to do with it. But the merger documents sitting on his desk, the $12 billion deal that would cement his legacy, the stockholders who demanded perfection, his mother's voice echoing in his head from 19 years ago. "Choose wisely, Grant. Some mistakes can't be undone." Instead, he said the words that would haunt him for months to come. "Without definitive proof, I cannot acknowledge this claim." The light in Elisa's eyes died. Not with tears, but with something worse. Understanding. She stood, gathering her dignity like armor. "You know what the saddest part is? I actually hoped you'd be different from the man my mother described. I'm glad she had the strength to walk away from you. I see now that it was the bravest thing she ever did." She was halfway to the door when he spoke again. "Elise." She paused but didn't turn around. "I hope you understand. This isn't personal. It's business." Now she did turn, and the look she gave him would stay with him long after she left. "No, Mr. Whitmore. This is absolutely personal. You just don't know the difference anymore. Welcome to Mr. Stevens Stories, where we bring you powerful narratives about life, family, and the choices that define us. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this one, stories that challenge us to think about what really matters, are what we're all about. And trust me, you won't want to miss where this journey takes us. Your subscription helps this channel grow and reach more people who need to hear these life-changing stories. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Rainhaven City smelled like salt and possibility. Mara Cole had learned to love that smell, the way it clung to her clothes after morning walks along the pier, the way it reminded her that she'd escaped and survived and built something real from the wreckage of her past. She stood now in her studio, natural light flooding through floor-to-ceiling windows, her hands moving across fabric samples with the practiced confidence of someone who'd transformed uncertainty into art. "Mom, what do you think about this color palette for the Henderson project?" Elise appeared in the doorway, her tablet displaying a mood board that somehow captured elegance and warmth in perfect balance. Mara looked up, and her heart did what it always did when she saw her daughter. It swelled with pride and cracked with guilt in the same breath. Elise at 18 was everything Mara had hoped she'd be. Thoughtful, creative, unafraid to voice her opinions but wise enough to listen. The lie Mara had told her, the story about the photographer father who died before she was born, had been meant to protect this. This bright, unburdened girl who didn't know she came from a world of steel and stone and men who measured worth in zeros. "It's perfect," Mara said, meaning both the design and the moment. "You have an eye for this. Better than mine, honestly." Elise rolled her eyes, but pleasure colored her cheeks. "You're biased. I'm honest. There's a difference." Mara set down her pencil. "How's the genetics assignment coming along?" "Due soon, right? Finished it last week. Just waiting on the database results for the extra credit portion." Elise shrugged like it was nothing, like she hadn't just lit a fuse that would detonate everything Mara had carefully constructed over 18 years. "Should be kind of cool to see the heritage breakdown. Maybe we'll discover I'm secretly descended from royalty or something." Mara's laugh sounded normal even as her stomach clenched. "With our luck, you're probably related to a line of starving artists." "Worse fates," Elise said, grinning as she headed back to her room. Mara returned to her work, but her hands had lost their steadiness. She'd known this day might come. Had prepared speeches and explanations that never felt adequate. But she'd imagined it happening years from now, when Elise was older, more settled, less vulnerable to the kind of hurt that shaped you in ways you couldn't undo. The genetics assignment was supposed to be simple. High school biology. Percentages and probabilities that meant nothing because Grant Whitmore's DNA wasn't in any commercial database. Except apparently, it was. 3 days later, Mara was reviewing contractor bids when she heard the sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a sob. Something in between that made her drop everything and run to Elisa's room. Her daughter sat frozen in front of her laptop, face pale, eyes fixed on the screen with the kind of intensity that meant the world had just shifted on its axis. "Elise? Baby, what's wrong?" "Mom." The word came out strange, unfamiliar. "Who is Grant Whitmore?" The name hit Mara like a physical blow. Her vision tunneled. Her carefully controlled breathing forgot its rhythm. 19 years vanished in an instant, and she was 22 again, standing in a penthouse apartment overlooking Iron Cliff, listening to the man she loved explain why their child couldn't exist. "Where did you hear that name?" Mara's voice barely worked. Elise turned the laptop around. The screen showed a genetic match report. 99.9% probability. Parental match. Grant Whitmore. "The database," Elise said, her voice hollow with shock. "My DNA matched with his. Mom, I've seen him in magazines. He's the founder of Whitmore Systems. He's a billionaire. He's..." She trailed off, looking at Mara with eyes that demanded truth after years of carefully crafted fiction. "He's alive." Mara's legs gave out. She sat on the edge of Elisa's bed, 18 years of protection crumbling like wet sand. "Yes. You told me my father was a photographer. You told me he died in an accident before I was born. You told me he would have loved me." Each sentence landed harder than the last. "Were any of those things true?" "He would have loved you," Mara whispered. "That part, at least, I believe. If he'd given himself the chance to know you. So everything else was a lie. It wasn't a question." Mara closed her eyes. "Your father isn't dead. But the man I knew, the man I thought he was, that person died the day he chose his ambition over us. I told you what I wished was true because the real story, Elise, the real story would have hurt you for no reason." "No reason?" Elisa's composure finally cracked. "I have a father. A living father. And you kept that from me for 18 years. You don't think I deserved to know? You don't think I had a right to make my own choices about whether to have a relationship with him? He didn't want you." The words came out harsher than Mara intended, sharp with old wounds. He made that abundantly clear before you were even born. I was protecting you from that rejection, from that world, from everything that comes with being connected to Grant Whitmore. Elise stood, pacing the small room like a caged thing. Tell me. All of it. I need to know who I am, and I can't do that with half-truths and protection I never asked for. So Mara told her. About meeting Grant at a tech conference where she'd been presenting her thesis on sustainable design integration. About the 6 months that followed, intense and consuming and entirely disconnected from reality. About discovering she was pregnant and believing, naively, that Grant would choose love over legacy. I told him in his office, Mara said, the memory still vivid enough to taste. Same office you probably sat in, knowing him. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Ironcliff like he owned the sky itself. He went quiet for so long I thought maybe he was processing, maybe he was scared but willing. Then he said, "This is unfortunate timing." Elise sank back into her desk chair. Unfortunate timing. His company was about to go through a major expansion. His mother, Victoria Whitmore, she came from old money, the kind that values reputation above everything else. She'd already made it clear that Grant's choice of relationship partners reflected on the family brand. A pregnant girlfriend with no social standing, no connections, no wealth. That wasn't part of the plan. So he chose the plan over you. Over me. He gave me options, or what he called options. A quiet termination with full medical coverage and a financial settlement. Or if I insisted on having the baby, a non-disclosure agreement, no contact, and enough money to quote, handle things discreetly. Mara's hands clenched in her lap. He said it wasn't personal. He said I had to understand the position he was in. He said that sometimes love isn't enough when you're building an empire. What did you say? I told him to keep his money. I told him I'd rather raise you alone than let you grow up knowing your father valued you at whatever price was in that NDA. I left Ironcliff that night. Came to Rainhaven where nobody knew me, where I could start over. I worked 3 jobs while I was pregnant, saved every penny, and when you were born. Mara's voice finally broke. When you were born, you were perfect. And I knew I'd made the right choice. We didn't need him. We didn't need his world or his money or his carefully calculated version of love. The room filled with weighted silence. Elise processed, her brilliant mind working through implications and emotions in that methodical way she had. Finally, she spoke. I need to meet him. Elise, no. Mom, I understand why you left. I even understand why you lied, even though it hurts. But I can't just pretend I don't know. He's my father. Good, bad, or indifferent, that's a fact now. And I need to look him in the eye and decide for myself what that means. Mara wanted to argue. Wanted to protect her daughter from the kind of rejection that carved holes in your foundation. But she'd raised Elise to be strong, to face hard truths, to make her own choices. She couldn't take that away from her now just because the truth involved Grant Whitmore. If you do this, Mara said carefully, it's going to hurt. He hasn't changed, Elise. Men like Grant, they don't suddenly develop hearts because 18 years have passed. His world is still built on image and control and protecting his interests. Then I'll know that too. Elise opened her laptop again, pulled up Grant's corporate email. I'm not asking for a father-daughter relationship. I'm asking for honesty. If he can't give me that, at least I'll have tried. That night, while Mara lay awake in her room replaying every decision that had led to this moment, Elise composed an email that would shatter Grant Whitmore's carefully controlled universe. Mr. Whitmore, my name is Elise Cole. Recent genetic testing has revealed a biological connection between us that I believe warrants a private conversation. I understand you're a busy man, but I'm requesting a meeting at your earliest convenience. This is not a matter of money or publicity. I simply need answers. Respectfully, Elise Cole. She attached her birth date and contact information. Stared at the send button for a full minute, her finger hovering over the mouse. Then she thought about her mother's face when she'd told the story, the pain still fresh after nearly 2 decades. She thought about the lies she'd believed her whole life. She thought about the man in the business magazines with eyes like hers who'd built an empire on technology designed to protect secrets. She pressed send. For 3 days, nothing happened. Elise went to classes, worked on her university applications, helped her mother with design projects. But underneath the normal routines, she was holding her breath, waiting for a response that might never come. Mara watched her with barely concealed anxiety, trying to prepare for either outcome without knowing which would hurt her daughter more. Grant, meanwhile, had opened the email approximately 47 times. His personal assistant had flagged it as priority given the personal nature and the claims involved. He'd read it while sitting in a board meeting, half listening to quarterly projections while processing the fact that his past had just arrived in his inbox with a polite request for conversation. He'd had his legal team run preliminary background checks. Elise Cole, 18 years old, honor student, applying to architecture programs at several prestigious universities. Mother, Mara Cole, successful interior architect in Rainhaven City. No criminal records, no history of fraud or extortion, no red flags that suggested this was anything other than what it appeared to be. A daughter. His daughter. The pregnancy he'd convinced himself had been handled quietly, tucked away in the category of problems solved and forgotten. Except she hadn't been solved. She'd been born and raised and had apparently inherited enough of his features that a genetic database had connected them across nearly 2 decades of careful separation. His mother's voice echoed in his head, the same lecture she'd given him when Mara had first announced the pregnancy. "You're on the verge of transforming this company into something unprecedented, Grant. One scandal, one whisper of impropriety or irresponsibility, and the investors will scatter. The board will question your judgment. Everything we've built will be compromised. Is that what you want? Is a moment of sentimentality worth destroying your legacy?" It hadn't been then. Was it now? Grant looked at the merger documents on his desk. Whitmore Systems was about to go public in the largest tech IPO of the decade. $12 billion. Partnerships with governments and Fortune 500 companies. A legacy that would outlast him by generations. And sitting in Rainhaven City was a girl with his DNA who wanted nothing more than a conversation. He wrote the response himself, not trusting his legal team to strike the right tone between caution and curiosity. MS. Cole, I've received your message. While I'm uncertain of the validity of your claim, I'm willing to meet. My office, Friday at 2 p.m. Come alone. Grant Whitmore. He sent it before he could reconsider, then immediately regretted the coldness of the tone. But softness was vulnerability, and he couldn't afford vulnerability right now. Not with everything on the line. When Elise received the response, she read it 3 times before showing her mother. Mara's face went through a series of expressions, landing finally on resigned acceptance. If you go, Mara said quietly, everything changes. He's not who you think he is, Elise. That world, it doesn't give. It only takes. Then why did you love him? Elise asked, the question hanging between them like smoke. Mara's eyes glistened. Because I didn't know any better. And by the time I did, I was already carrying you. Friday arrived wrapped in coastal fog. Elise dressed carefully, choosing clothes that projected confidence without trying too hard. Professional but not corporate. She wanted Grant to see her as she was, not as some supplicant begging for recognition. Mara offered to drive her, but Elise declined. This was something she needed to do alone. The train from Rainhaven to Ironcliff took 2 hours. Elise watched the landscape transform through the window. The artistic chaos of her coastal city giving way to geometric precision. Cafes and galleries replaced by steel towers and luxury car dealerships. The people changed too. The relaxed, creative energy of Rainhaven replaced by the sharp-eyed intensity of Ironcliff professionals who walked like they were always late for something important. Whitmore Systems occupied the top 15 floors of the tallest building in the financial district. The lobby alone probably cost more than Mara's entire house. Marble floors so polished they reflected like mirrors. Security guards in suits that fit too well to be off the rack. A reception desk that looked carved from a single piece of obsidian. Elise gave her name to the receptionist, a woman with perfect posture and a practiced smile. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. 42nd floor. Someone will escort you up." The elevator ride felt endless. Elisa's reflection stared back at her from the polished steel walls. She looked small suddenly, out of place in this world of calculated luxury. But she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin. She was Mara Cole's daughter. She'd been raised to hold her ground. The 42nd floor was quieter than she'd expected. Thick carpet absorbed sound. The walls were decorated with abstract art that probably cost more than a college education. Grant's assistant, a man in his 30s with the efficient demeanor of someone who managed chaos for a living, greeted her with professional courtesy. "Ms. Cole. Please follow me." He led her down a hallway to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Ironcliff. The city spread below like a kingdom, and for a moment, Elise understood what her mother had meant about Grant owning the sky itself. Then he walked in, and everything else fell away. Grant Whitmore in person was different from the magazine photos. More human somehow, despite the expensive suit and the air of controlled authority. He was tall, his hair showing just the first threads of gray at the temples. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Green, like hers. The exact same shade, with the same intensity that teachers had always commented on when Elise concentrated on a problem. "Ms. Cole," he said, his voice measured. "You have my attention." Elise met his gaze without flinching. "I have your DNA too. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" They sat across from each other at the conference table. Grant folded his hands, the gesture controlled and deliberate. "I've reviewed your initial email. I've had my team conduct some background research. You seem to be exactly who you claim to be. But before we go any further, I need to understand your intentions. What is it you want from me?" "The truth," Elise said simply. "My mother told me you didn't want me. That you chose your career over having a family. I want to hear it from you. I want to know if the man who looks at me and sees his own features is capable of acknowledging what that means." Grant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your mother and I had a relationship many years ago. It ended. If there was a child, if you are that child, then we need to establish that fact through proper channels before any acknowledgement can be made." "Proper channels," Elise repeated. "You mean lawyers and NDAs and whatever other tools you use to make inconvenient truths disappear. I mean verification that can withstand scrutiny. I'm sure you understand that someone in my position attracts certain types of attention. Claims that may or may not be legitimate. I need to protect my interests." "Your interests." Elise pulled out her tablet, opened the genetic report, slid it across the table. 99.9% probability. "The science doesn't lie, Mr. Whitmore. But I'm starting to understand that you might." Grant looked at the report. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition. Maybe even regret. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the data with the focus of a man who'd built his empire on numbers and code. "This is from a commercial database," he finally said. "Useful for genealogy hobbyists, but not definitive for legal purposes. I'll arrange for a proper paternity test through my medical team. Independent lab, chain of custody protocols, results that would hold up in any court. And if those results match what's already on that screen, then we'll discuss next steps. He closed the tablet, pushed it back toward her. But I want to be clear about something, Elise. I'm not a man who makes decisions based on emotion or pressure. If you are my biological daughter, that's a fact we'll need to address. But it doesn't automatically create obligations or relationships beyond what we mutually agree to. Elise felt something cold settle in her chest. You're already preparing to deny me. You're going to take the test, confirm what we both already know, and then find some technical reason why it doesn't matter. Because acknowledging me would be bad for business. You're putting words in my mouth. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, that's exactly what's happening. You're calculating. Risk versus reward. Reputation versus responsibility. And I'm starting to see that my mother was right about you. You measure everything in terms of what it costs you, never what it's worth. Grant leaned back in his chair. For a moment, something almost human crossed his face. Curiosity maybe, or a flicker of the person he'd been before ambition had calcified into his identity. You look like her. Your mother. Same fire when you're angry. Same refusal to back down. Don't, Elise said sharply. Don't pretend you remember her with anything other than regret that she complicated your plans. She told me what you said when she told you she was pregnant. Unfortunate timing. That's what I was. An inconvenience in your schedule. The words landed. Grant's composure cracked, just barely, but enough for Elise to see she'd struck bone. Good. Let him feel something, even if it was just discomfort. I was 26 years old, Grant said quietly. I was building something from nothing. The decisions I made then, they weren't made lightly. But they were made from a different place than where I stand now. Regret doesn't undo abandonment. And it certainly doesn't give you the right to deny me now because it's still inconvenient. Grant's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned. I need to take this. It's about the merger. Can you wait here for a moment? The merger. Elise laughed without humor. Of course. Business comes first. It always does with you, doesn't it? He stood, paused at the door. I'll have my assistant arrange the paternity test. We'll have results within a week. Then we can discuss this rationally, without assumptions or accusations. I don't need a week in a lab to tell me what I already know. But clearly you do. So fine. Run your test. Hire your lawyers. Do whatever you need to do to protect your precious empire. Just don't expect me to pretend this is about verification. We both know you're stalling while you figure out how to make me go away. Grant left without responding. Elise sat alone in the conference room, overlooking a city that felt as cold and hard as the man who'd just walked out. She'd come here hoping for something. Not a fairy tale reunion, but maybe acknowledgement. Basic human decency. Instead, she'd found exactly what her mother had warned her about. A man so armored in calculation that he couldn't recognize his own daughter standing right in front of him. The assistant returned with paperwork for the paternity test. Medical release forms, consent documents, chain of custody protocols. Elise signed them all with mechanical precision, her emotions locked down tight. She'd learned that from watching her mother. When the world tried to break you, you became steel. Mr. Whitmore will be in touch when the results are available, the assistant said, professional and detached. I'm sure he will. Elise gathered her things. Tell him I said the science will prove what his mirror already told him. Whether he has the courage to admit it is another question entirely. She left Whitmore Systems the same way she'd arrived. Alone. But something had shifted inside her. The girl who'd walked into that building hoping for answers had been replaced by someone harder, clearer. She didn't need Grant Whitmore's acknowledgement. She'd never needed it. She had a mother who'd chosen her every single day. She had a life built on truth and resilience and love that didn't come with conditions. Grant Whitmore had his empire. But Elise had something more valuable. She had herself. The train ride back to Rainhaven passed in a blur. Elise stared out the window as Ironcliff's sharp edges softened into coastal curves. By the time she walked through her front door, she'd made peace with what had happened. Or at least, she'd begun to. Mara was waiting in the kitchen, pretending to work on design samples but really just watching the door. How did it go? Elise set down her bag, walked into her mother's arms. He's exactly who you said he was. Cold. Calculating. More concerned with protecting his reputation than acknowledging the truth. I'm sorry, baby. I hoped maybe time had changed him. Time doesn't change people who don't want to change. Elise pulled back, managed a small smile. But you know what? I'm okay. Because I have you. And that's more than enough. They ordered takeout and spent the evening on the couch, not talking about Grant or the test or any of it. Just being together, the way they always had been. Mother and daughter. A family built on choice rather than obligation. Meanwhile, in Ironcliff, Grant Whitmore sat in his penthouse apartment with a glass of scotch and the genetic report Elise had left behind. He'd pulled his own DNA profile from the medical files his company maintained for executive health screenings. Cross-referenced the markers. The match was absolute. Undeniable. This girl, this stranger who had his eyes and his mother's fire, was his daughter. His phone rang. Victoria Whitmore. His mother had a sixth sense for when complications arose. I hear you had an interesting visitor today, she said without preamble. My sources tell me a young woman met with you. Same young woman who's been flagged by our security team for genetic database connections to our family. Your sources work quickly. I taught you better than to let ghosts from your past materialize in your conference room, Grant. What does she want? Acknowledgement. Answers. The usual things children want from absent parents. Grant took a drink, the scotch burning on the way down. She's mine, Mother. The test will confirm it, but I already know. She has my eyes. She has your stubbornness. There's no denying it. Then deny it anyway. Victoria's voice went hard. You're 3 weeks from the biggest IPO in tech history. Investors are poised to make you one of the wealthiest men in the country. The board has complete confidence in your leadership. And now you're telling me some girl shows up with a DNA test and you're considering what? Playing father? Destroying everything we've built because of guilt? She's not some girl. She's my daughter. She's a liability. Handle it the way we handled it before. Money, NDAs, make her go away. You have too much at stake to let sentiment interfere with strategy. Grant hung up without responding. His mother would call back, she always did. But for now, he needed silence. Needed to think without her voice in his head telling him what his legacy demanded. He pulled up Elisa's file on his computer. The background check his team had compiled. Honor student. Volunteer work at community design centers. Accepted to 3 universities with scholarship offers. Raised by a single mother who'd built a successful career from nothing. She didn't need his money. Didn't need his name or his connections. She'd said as much in their meeting. All she wanted was acknowledgement, and that was the one thing he couldn't give without risking everything. But sitting there, looking at her academic transcripts and the photo from her college applications, Grant felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Regret. Not the abstract kind that came from business decisions gone wrong, but the deep, aching kind that came from recognizing you'd sacrificed something irreplaceable on the altar of ambition. The paternity test results came back in 5 days, not 7. Grant opened the email in his office, alone, the city spread below him in all its indifferent glory. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Definitive. Undeniable. Scientific proof of what his conscience had already confirmed. He had a daughter. A brilliant, brave daughter who he'd denied before she was born and was about to deny again because his mother was right. The timing was catastrophic. The merger, the IPO, the carefully constructed narrative of Grant Whitmore as the focused, family-less genius who dedicated his entire existence to building something revolutionary. A secret daughter didn't fit that story. A secret daughter complicated everything. His legal team prepared the statement. Carefully worded, legally airtight. While recent genetic testing has suggested a biological connection between myself and MS. Elise Cole, further independent analysis has revealed inconclusive results that prevent definitive acknowledgement at this time. Out of respect for all parties' privacy, I will not be commenting further on this matter. It was a lie wrapped in legal language. The results weren't inconclusive. They were absolute. But the statement created enough doubt, enough wiggle room, that investors wouldn't panic and the press wouldn't have a confirmed scandal to run with. Grant stared at the statement for hours. Imagined Elise reading it. Imagined the look on her face when she realized he'd chosen exactly what she'd predicted. Empire over truth. Reputation over responsibility. He signed it anyway. The email went to Elise that evening. Short, formal, devastating. Grant didn't include the actual test results, just the statement his legal team had crafted. He CC'd his attorneys and marked the email as final communication on the matter. Then he poured himself another scotch and tried to convince himself he'd made the right choice. Elise was helping her mother with a client presentation when the email arrived. She read it once, quickly, then closed her laptop without a word. "What is it?" Mara asked, already knowing. "He denied me. Called the results inconclusive even though we both know they're not. He chose his merger over telling the truth." Elisa's voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that came from shock rather than acceptance. "I actually thought, for a second, that maybe he'd surprise me. That maybe 18 years and a face-to-face meeting would make him choose differently. But you were right, Mom. He hasn't changed at all." Mara crossed the room, wrapped her daughter in a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry. You deserved better. You deserved a father who was brave enough to choose you. I already have a parent who chose me." Elise hugged back, hard. "Every single day for 18 years. That's more than most people get. Grant Whitmore can keep his empire. I don't need anything from him." But late that night, alone in her room, Elise let herself cry. Not for the relationship she'd never have, but for the man who was so lost in his own ambition that he couldn't recognize what he was giving up. She cried for the little girl she'd been, growing up with a story about a photographer father who would have loved her. And she cried for the truth, which was so much sadder. A living father who was too afraid to love her at all. The next morning, she woke up with dry eyes and clear purpose. Grant Whitmore had made his choice. Now she'd make hers. She wouldn't pursue legal action or seek media attention. She wouldn't try to force acknowledgement from someone who clearly didn't deserve to know her. She would simply move forward, carrying the truth quietly, living her life with the integrity her mother had modeled. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. Grant's younger brother Marcus had always been the family disappointment. Where Grant was focused and driven, Marcus was creative and scattered. Where Grant embraced the family legacy, Marcus had spent his 20s traveling, photographing, pursuing passions that didn't come with quarterly earnings reports. Their mother barely spoke to him. Grant himself maintained only the most distant relationship, connected by blood and obligation but little else. So when Marcus showed up at Grant's office unannounced, it was unusual enough that Grant's assistant actually buzzed to warn him. Your brother is here. He says it's urgent. Marcus walked in looking like he always did. Expensive clothes worn with deliberate casualness. Camera bag slung over one shoulder. An energy that suggested rules were more like suggestions. Heard you have a daughter, Marcus said without preamble. Heard you denied her. Wanted to confirm you're still the same calculating bastard you've always been. Grant's expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. Our mother's been on the phone with half her social circle, making sure everyone knows the story before it can spread. Girl shows up with DNA proof, you run tests, results come back positive, you deny her anyway to protect the IPO. That about sum it up? It's more complicated than that. It really isn't. Marcus dropped into a chair uninvited. You have a kid. You're pretending you don't. Same thing you did 19 years ago, just with better lawyers this time. You don't understand the pressures I'm under. The responsibilities. One scandal right now could cost billions. Could destroy investor confidence. Could undo decades of work. And acknowledging your own daughter would be a scandal? That's what you're telling yourself? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what, Grant? I've spent my whole life being told I'm the family screw-up. Too irresponsible, too unfocused, too unwilling to sacrifice everything for the Whitmore legacy. But at least I've never looked a child in the face and pretended they don't exist to protect my bank account. Get out. I want to meet her. Your daughter. Elise. I want to meet my niece and tell her that at least one person in this family isn't a complete coward. Grant stood, hands flat on his desk. You will stay away from her. You will not contact her or acknowledge any connection. That's not a request, Marcus. That's a direct order. You can't order me to ignore family. Blood doesn't disappear just because you're afraid of it. Marcus stood too, met his brother's glare with equal intensity. I've watched you become this. Watched ambition eat everything human inside you. But I won't watch you do this to a kid who did nothing wrong except have the misfortune of being related to you. He left before Grant could respond. And true to his word, Marcus found Elise. He showed up in Rainhaven 3 days later. Tracked down Mara's studio through public business records. He knocked on the door mid-morning, when Elise was helping catalog fabric samples. Can I help you? Elise asked, opening the door to find a man who looked disturbingly familiar. Same eyes as Grant, but warmer somehow. Laugh lines instead of the harsh angles of constant calculation. I'm Marcus Whitmore, he said. Grant's brother. Your uncle, I guess, if we're being technical about it. I know this is weird and probably unwelcome, but I was hoping we could talk. Elise should have closed the door. Should have told him the Whitmores had done enough damage. But curiosity won. And maybe something else. A desperate hope that someone in that family might be different. They sat in a coffee shop down the street. Marcus ordered for both of them, easy and comfortable in a way his brother would never be. When the drinks arrived, he didn't waste time with small talk. Grant told me he denied you. Sent some corporate speak email about inconclusive results even though we both know that's garbage. I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family is okay with that. And I wanted to meet you. See for myself what kind of person you are. Why? Elise asked bluntly. What does it matter to you? Because I spent my whole life being the family disappointment. The one who didn't prioritize legacy and reputation above everything else. And then my brother goes and does something like this, denies his own kid to protect a business deal, and I realized maybe being the disappointment isn't the worst thing to be. Elise studied him. Looked for the calculation she'd seen in Grant, the constant assessment of angles and advantages. But Marcus just looked sad and a little angry and genuinely interested in knowing her. What do you want? She asked carefully. If you're here to offer money or convince me to sign an NDA, you're wasting your time. I'm here because you're family. And family shouldn't be abandoned for the sake of quarterly earnings. I can't undo what Grant did or make him acknowledge you. But I can acknowledge you. I can tell you that you have an uncle who thinks what happened to you is wrong and who'd like to know you if you're willing. For the first time since the DNA results had appeared on her screen, Elise felt something other than hurt or anger. Hope maybe. Or at least the possibility of connection that wasn't conditional on business strategy. They talked for 2 hours. Marcus told stories about growing up Whitmore, about the pressure and the expectations and the way their mother had shaped Grant into the man he'd become. He talked about his own escape into photography, about choosing art over empire and paying for it with a lifetime of family disapproval. And Elise talked about her life. About growing up with Mara, about the lie she'd believed, about the shock of discovering Grant and the devastation of his denial. Marcus listened without judgment, without trying to defend his brother or minimize her pain. When they finally stood to leave, Marcus pulled a business card from his wallet. "This is my number. If you ever want to talk, or if you just want to know more about your family history from someone who'll actually tell you the truth, call me. No strings. No agendas. Just family." Elise took the card. Slipped it into her pocket. "Thank you. For coming. For caring. It means more than you probably know. You're my niece. Of course I care." Marcus smiled, and in that moment, Elise saw what Grant might have been if he'd chosen differently. "And Elise? Don't let my brother's fear define who you are. You're better than that. Better than all of us, probably." News of Marcus's visit reached Grant within hours. His mother called, furious, demanding he control his brother and prevent any further contact. The board members expressed concern about family drama affecting the IPO. Grant's legal team prepared documents restricting Marcus's ability to speak publicly about family matters. But Marcus didn't speak publicly. He just maintained quiet contact with Elise. Occasional texts. Coffee meetings every few weeks. A presence that said she wasn't invisible, wasn't disposable, wasn't a scandal to be managed. And Grant watched from his tower, seeing the relationship develop through private investigator reports and his mother's increasingly agitated phone calls. Watched his brother do what he himself hadn't had the courage to do. Acknowledge her. Choose her. Show up. 3 weeks before the IPO, Grant attended a charity gala. These events were strategic necessities. Places to network, to cement relationships with investors and politicians and other power brokers who would determine the success of his company's public offering. He wore his armor of expensive tailoring and practiced charm, making the rounds with mechanical precision. And then he saw them across the ballroom. Mara and Elise. Mara looked exactly as he remembered. Maybe more beautiful, if that was possible. 18 years had refined rather than diminished her. She wore a simple dress that probably cost nothing compared to the designer gowns around her, but she wore it with the kind of confidence that came from knowing her worth had nothing to do with price tags. And Elise. God. Elise stood beside her mother, poised and present, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was receiving some award. Rising Star in Sustainable Design. The kind of recognition Grant's company sponsored as part of their community engagement initiatives. The irony was thick enough to choke on. He watched from the shadows as Elise accepted her award. Watched her thank her mother, her mentors, her community. She never mentioned her father. Never even glanced in the direction where Grant stood, invisible among the crowd. But Mara saw him. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and in that look, Grant saw everything he'd sacrificed. The woman who'd loved him before he'd calcified into ambition. The life they might have built together. The daughter who should have been his greatest achievement instead of his most carefully hidden liability. Mara's expression didn't change. She simply looked at him, acknowledged his existence, then turned her attention back to Elise. The message was clear. You chose this. You chose your empire over us. Now live with it. Grant left the gala early. Sat in his car in the parking garage, hands gripping the steering wheel. The merger would close in 2 weeks. The IPO would make him a billionaire several times over. He would have everything he'd worked for. Everything he'd sacrificed for. Everything except the 2 people who just walked back out of his life without a second glance. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Just a photo. Elise and Mara, laughing together after the ceremony. The caption read, "This is what you're missing. Hope your billions keep you warm." Grant stared at that photo for a long time. At the joy in their faces. The genuine connection. The life they'd built without him. He'd convinced himself that walking away had been protecting them. That his world was too harsh, too demanding, too dangerous for people with soft hearts and artistic dreams. But looking at them now, thriving without him, he saw the truth. He hadn't been protecting them. He'd been protecting himself. From vulnerability. From the possibility of failure. From having to be something other than the calculating genius who prioritized strategy over soul. The choice crystallized in that moment. He could continue forward. Complete the merger, execute the IPO, cement his legacy as one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs of his generation. All he had to do was maintain the lie. Keep denying Elise. Keep pretending his past didn't exist. Or he could choose differently. The next morning, Grant called an emergency board meeting. His legal team, his CFO, his advisors all gathered in the conference room where he'd first met Elise. He stood at the head of the table, looking at the people who'd helped him build this empire, and made the announcement that would either destroy everything or redefine what success actually meant. I need to tell you something that will likely affect the IPO. Possibly negatively. But it's time I stopped letting fear make my decisions. He took a breath. I have a daughter. Her name is Elise Cole. She's 18 years old. I've denied her existence to protect the company's image and the merger timeline. But that ends today. I'm going public with the truth. The room erupted. His CFO demanded details. The lawyers warned about liability and lawsuits. Board members calculated the potential stock price impact. His mother, joining by video call, looked like she might actually have a stroke. You'll destroy everything, Victoria hissed. For what? A girl you don't even know? Sentimentality that serves no strategic purpose? For the chance to be something other than a coward, Grant said quietly. I've spent my entire life building an empire. Maybe it's time I tried building a relationship that isn't based on quarterly projections and shareholder value. The fallout was immediate and brutal. 3 board members resigned. 2 major investors pulled out of the IPO. The stock price, even before going public, took a 15% hit in private trading. The media, getting wind of the story, descended with the kind of gleeful savagery reserved for fallen titans. Billionaire CEO acknowledges secret daughter days before IPO. Grant Whitmore's hidden family scandal rocks tech world. Can Whitmore Systems recover from founder's betrayal? But Grant didn't walk it back. He released a full statement. Not the legal speak his team had crafted, but the truth. He'd had a relationship 19 years ago. There had been a pregnancy. He'd made the cowardly choice to walk away. Now he was trying to make it right, even if he was 18 years too late. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't try to minimize the abandonment. He simply acknowledged what he'd done and stated that he hoped, eventually, to have the chance to know his daughter. The statement went viral. Opinions split sharply. Some praised his honesty. Others condemned him for the initial abandonment. Investors debated whether his personal life affected his ability to run a company. The stock continued to fluctuate wildly. And in Rain Haven, Elise read the statement on her phone while sitting in her mother's studio. "He went public," she said, her voice strange. "After denying me, after choosing the merger, he actually went public." Mara looked over her shoulder at the screen. "Read the statement twice." "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." Elise set down her phone. "Part of me wants to ignore it. He made his choice, and it took public pressure to make him reverse it. That's not the same as actually caring." "No, it's not," Mara agreed. "But it might be growth. People don't change overnight. Sometimes they change in painful, imperfect increments. Do you think I should see him? If he asks to meet again?" Mara was quiet for a long moment. "I think you should do whatever feels right for you. Not what's fair to him, or what I think is best, or what makes a good story. Whatever you need." Elise thought about it for days. Watched the media circus from a distance. Saw Grant doing interviews where he talked about regret and mistakes and hoping to earn a place in his daughter's life. Saw the company stock slowly stabilizing as investors decided integrity might actually be worth something. She saw Marcus post a photo of Grant looking exhausted but determined, with the caption, "My brother's learning that some things matter more than market share." Proud of him for finally figuring it out. And finally, 3 weeks after Grant's public acknowledgement, Elise sent an email. "Mr. Whitmore, I saw your statement. I appreciate the honesty, even if the timing was complicated by business pressures. I'm not ready for a full relationship. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready for that. But I'm willing to have a conversation. Not in your office. Not with lawyers present. Just two people trying to figure out if there's any path forward from here. Let me know if you're interested. Elise." Grant's response came within an hour. A time, a place. A small cafe in neutral territory between Rainhaven and Ironcliff. And a simple line at the end. "Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve." They met on a Saturday morning. Elise arrived first, claimed a corner table, ordered coffee she didn't drink while she waited. Grant showed up exactly on time, looking less polished than she'd ever seen him. No suit. Just jeans and a button-down shirt. Human clothes for a man trying to be human. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting down across from her. "I'm not making any promises," Elise said immediately. "About forgiveness or relationships or anything else. I'm here because I wanted to hear, in person, why you changed your mind." Grant nodded. "That's fair. You want the truth?" "Always. I saw you at the charity gala. You and your mother. I watched you accept an award and thank everyone who'd helped you build your life. Everyone except me, because I hadn't been there to help. And I realized I'd spent 18 years convinced I was protecting you by staying away, when really, I was just protecting myself from having to be vulnerable." He paused, gathering words the way someone unfamiliar with emotional honesty might gather unfamiliar tools. "My brother told me that choosing you would cost me everything I'd built. And he was right. The IPO is still happening, but at a lower valuation. I lost board members, investors, credibility. My mother isn't speaking to me. The company I spent my life building will never be quite what it might have been." "And you regret it," Elise said, not quite a question. "No." Grant met her eyes. "I regret the 18 years I wasted. I regret the cowardice that made me deny you in the first place. But acknowledging you publicly? That's the first thing I've done in years that I don't regret. Even if you decide you want nothing to do with me, even if this conversation is the last time we speak, I don't regret choosing the truth." Elise studied him. Looked for the calculation she'd seen before, the strategic positioning. But all she saw was exhaustion and hope and something that might actually be genuine regret. "I grew up thinking my father was dead," she said quietly. "My mom told me he was a photographer who died before I was born. It was a beautiful lie. The kind meant to protect rather than deceive. When I found out the truth, when I found out you were alive and had chosen not to know me, it broke something fundamental. My entire identity was built on a story that wasn't real. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate, but I am genuinely sorry for what my choices cost you. Here's what I need you to understand." Elise leaned forward. "I don't need you. I have a mother who chose me every single day. Who worked 3 jobs to give me a good life. Who showed me what real strength looks like. I'm not some abandoned child waiting for a father to rescue her. I'm whole exactly as I am. I understand that. But..." She took a breath. "I'm also curious. About you. About the family I didn't know existed. About whether the man who finally chose honesty can maintain it. So I'm willing to try. Slowly. With boundaries. With the understanding that you've earned none of my trust and all of my skepticism." Grant's shoulders dropped like he'd been holding tension for weeks. "That's more than I hoped for. What would boundaries look like?" They talked for 2 hours. Established rules. Coffee meetings, maybe once a month to start. No pressure for emotional intimacy. No expectations of instant father-daughter bonding. Just 2 people getting to know each other, building something new rather than trying to resurrect what had never existed. When they finally stood to leave, Grant hesitated. "Can I ask you something? About your mother?" "You can ask. I might not answer. Is she happy? Mara. Did she build a good life for herself?" Elise smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her careful control. "She built a beautiful life. Successful career, amazing friends, a daughter who adores her. She didn't need you to thrive. She just needed to get away from you." The words should have hurt. Maybe they did. But Grant just nodded. "Good. She deserved better than what I gave her. I'm glad she found it." Over the following months, Grant and Elise built something fragile and uncertain. Monthly coffee meetings became occasional dinners. Elise met more of the Whitmore family, finding unexpected connections with Marcus and cautious civility with Victoria, who eventually accepted that her son had made his choice. Mara stayed carefully distant. She supported Elisa's decision to explore a relationship with Grant, but she herself had no interest in revisiting that chapter of her life. She'd moved on. Built something new. Grant respected that boundary, never pushing for more than Elise was willing to share about her mother. The IPO eventually happened, at a lower valuation than originally projected but still successful. Whitmore Systems went public, and Grant became a billionaire, though not the kind of billionaire he'd imagined. His wealth came with asterisks now. Footnotes about scandal and hidden children and the cost of choosing truth over image. But he also had something he hadn't expected. A daughter who called him occasionally. Who sent him photos of her university projects. Who included him, cautiously, in the margins of her life. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no dramatic reconciliation scene where everyone cried and hugged and 17 years of absence magically dissolved. Elise maintained her boundaries. Grant respected them. They built their relationship on the foundation of honesty rather than trying to construct something from the rubble of lies. And Mara, watching from the life she'd built, felt something she hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly. But maybe closure. The knowledge that her daughter would be okay. That Elise had the strength to navigate complex relationships without losing herself. That the lie Mara had told, while imperfect, had protected Elise long enough for her to become someone who could handle the truth. 2 years later, at Elise's university graduation, Grant sat in the audience. Not in the VIP section. Not making speeches or demanding recognition. Just sitting 3 rows back, watching his daughter cross the stage to accept her degree in sustainable architecture. Mara sat 2 rows in front of him. They didn't speak. Barely acknowledged each other. But when Elisa's name was called, when she walked across that stage with her head high and her future bright, they both stood and applauded. In that moment, whatever had been between them, whatever complicated history and painful choices, all of it faded against the simple fact of Elisa's success. They'd both, in their own imperfect ways, contributed to the woman she'd become. Mara through constant presence and unconditional love. Grant through absence that had taught Elise she didn't need anyone's validation to know her worth. After the ceremony, Elise found them both. Hugged her mother first, long and tight. Then turned to Grant, offering a handshake that evolved into a brief, careful hug. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Wouldn't have missed it," Grant replied. And he meant it. They took a photo together. All 3 of them. Not as a family in any traditional sense, but as 3 people connected by biology and history and the complicated ways humans try to make meaning from their mistakes. Elise posted it to social media with a simple caption. "Graduation Day. Grateful for everyone who helped me get here." The photo went viral, of course. Picked up by media outlets still obsessed with the Whitmore family drama. But Elise didn't care about the headlines. She'd learned, watching both her parents in their different ways, that other people's narratives couldn't define who you were. Only your choices could do that. And she'd chosen to be someone who could hold complexity. Who could acknowledge that her father had failed her and was trying to do better. Who could love her mother fiercely while also understanding the burden of the lie. Who could build a life that honored both the truth and the protection that had kept her safe long enough to handle it. Years later, when people asked Elise about her relationship with Grant Whitmore, she would say this. "My father made terrible choices when I was born. He let fear and ambition override love and responsibility. But he also eventually chose differently. Not perfectly. Not in a way that erased the hurt. But with enough honesty to build something new. I'm not grateful for the abandonment. But I'm grateful for the lesson. That people can change, slowly and imperfectly, if they're willing to sacrifice what they thought mattered for what actually does." The story of Mara and Grant and Elise isn't a story about forgiveness conquering all or love solving everything. It's a story about the complicated ways families form and fracture and sometimes, tentatively, rebuild. About the lies we tell to protect the people we love. About the courage it takes to choose truth even when it costs everything. Grant never got the empire he'd originally envisioned. His company was successful but marked by scandal. His legacy would always include the daughter he'd denied and the years he'd wasted. But he also got something else. Sunday brunches with Elise where they talked about design and technology and slowly built understanding. A relationship earned rather than assumed. The knowledge that he'd finally, after 18 years, made the right choice. Mara never forgave him. Not really. But she stopped carrying the anger. Stopped letting his choices define her story. She built an even more successful career, found love again with someone who chose her completely, and watched her daughter thrive in ways that had nothing to do with the Whitmore name or money. And Elise became exactly who she was always meant to be. An architect who designed spaces for people who'd been overlooked. A woman who understood that identity wasn't determined by DNA or the stories others told, but by the choices you made and the life you built. If you've stayed with us through this entire journey, thank you. Stories like this matter because they reflect the messy reality of family, the cost of ambition, and the possibility of redemption even when it comes too late to undo the damage. These are the narratives that challenge us to think about our own choices, our own priorities, what we're willing to sacrifice and what we absolutely shouldn't. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that complicated relationships don't have simple solutions. Drop a comment telling us what you think about second chances, about whether Grant deserved Elisa's willingness to try, about whether Mara's lie was justified. Your thoughts make this community stronger, and I read every single comment. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mr. Steven Stories. We're building something special here. A space for narratives that don't just entertain but educate and inspire. Stories about real human struggles and triumphs. Your subscription helps us grow and reach more people who need these messages. Remember, life rarely gives us fairy tale endings. But it does give us choices. The choice to be honest even when it's costly. The choice to protect the people we love even when it's hard. The choice to grow and change even when we've spent years going in the wrong direction. What choice will you make today? Think about it. And I'll see you in the next story.